Hi, good afternoon, everyone. About the end of daylight savings time, or maybe not the end, we'll see now how we get there. I'm Jordi Baquer. I'm the Director for Foresight Analysis at the Open Society Foundations, based here in Barcelona. And I'm going to be introducing a panel of people who are like me, are experts on the very issue. This Saturday, contrary to expectations, we'll have 1 more hour to sleep or to dance or to do whatever you do on Saturday nights, once again. That's a story that we thought we were leaving behind at some point, it felt like. And we're back, maybe not to square one, we're going to discuss this today, but certainly back, farther back than we thought we had arrived at a certain point. Today's session is not mostly to restate the case for ending the daylight savings time. It's more about understanding why we did not get all the way there and what's left. What else do we need to do in terms of argument, in terms of bringing people to the table, in terms of getting the critical mass to move past this, finally, hopefully, leave behind these longer nights once a year and shorter nights another time a year. And to do this, we have 3 speakers today. So I'm going to start closest to me, Maria Nikolopoulou, who is a member of the Economic and Social Committee at the European Union. Then Ticia Luengo, who is the co-founder of Better Times as a member of the International Association for Natural Time. And Til Roenneberg, who's a chronobiologist, so who's bringing the science side to this, although all of us, I think, have been following it for a bit. And we will do first a round where I'd like to look, again, not so much make the case again for the change, although maybe some of the arguments will need to be found the first time around. The obstacles, where are the difficulties, where are the constituencies or the people who need to be brought to our side, those who are indifferent, those who are opposed, perhaps, who will perhaps need to be activated more this time around. And to do this, I'm going to start again in this order. So, Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good evening to everyone. To put you a little bit in context, I don't know if you know the European Economic and Social Committee. It's a consultative body of the European Union, where civil society organizations are represented, so meaning trade unions, business associations, consumers, environmentalists, and so on. And our main task is to provide opinions for the legislative proposals of the rest of the European bodies. So as to be balanced in representing every stakeholder's concerns and ideas. We want to bring everyone into the dialogue. Since we were about the abolition of the time change, we came to the conclusion that, yes, in principle it was a very good idea, but we needed more time. It wasn't mature enough, the time that it went through the proposal. We've seen that the Commission, who was the main body who actually put forward the issue on the agenda, the concept on a public consultation, which, by the way, at that point, and maybe even today, it was the biggest, the consultation with most part at the European level. There were about 4.6 million people that they responded. But analyzing the data, we realized that not all countries were on the same level. 70% of the answers came from Germany, followed by France, who had an 8.6% of participation. So you can imagine that for most of the countries, this was not a priority, apart from the fact that There were some countries that they were even against the abolition of the time change. There were still different answers on whether to start on the summer or on the winter time. So we needed, at that point, we needed a lot more time to discuss in this sense. Another thing to take into account is that the current situation is quite harmonized in terms of time zones within Europe. So in the worst case scenario, and since we didn't have enough time among the member states to discuss, imagine a situation where we're not ready to implement the change, and we travel from Spain to France and to Germany, and we switch our watches back and forth if harmonization and coordination on a European level is not achieved. The decision is also quite tricky because the abolition of the change of time was to be taken on a European level, on a Commission, Parliament, and Council level, but the actual time use for each country was to be taken on a member states level. And this is why the coordination got a little bit more complicated. This, of course, apart from hassling the traveling or the tourists that they go around changing countries, it was mostly problematic for the internal market, for the supply chains, for people who cross the borders every day, mostly in Central Europe, to go to work. So this is why we were urging a lot to have more time to discuss and to keep things on a certain agreement among the member states. And finally, the decision of the Commission, or the idea that they had, is to finish this dossier, to have it implemented as soon as possible before the end of the previous Commission's mandate. This is why there was such an urge to finish everything off, which created concerns in terms of how we adapt our system, our digital systems, thinking on aviation, transport, banking, the administration. So all these parameter changes in the systems, it's not only on a European level, it's on a global level. We are completely interconnected with the world. And it's not just pushing a button. We need to test these kind of changes, no, in order to make sure that the world keeps moving around. This is why, at the moment that we discussed, it was obviously a very good idea. We had the scientific data to back it up, but we needed more time.
Thank you. Beautiful summary, and also many threads to follow. Let's continue with Ticia.
I'm going to give a brief overview of the current initiatives to end DST and also the key challenges that we've encountered. I can tell you that there are activists and advocates fighting to end the clock changes worldwide, clock changes and unnatural time zones. In Europe, since DST was introduced in the 1970s, and even before that, when during World War II, the West European countries were Spain, France, and the Benelux were put on Central European time. Maybe you can show the picture here. Which is not that picture. Yeah, you can see here the Western European time is UTC, with the meridian going through London and Alicante, and the Central European time is UTC +1, with a meridian going through Prague. We are currently living on UTC +1 during the standard time, and during the summertime we are living on UTC +2, which is actually Kiev time. So what people felt then that started them to become activists, and what we know now, is that living on such an unnatural time zone puts us at a disadvantage. It makes us, and especially our youth, more prone to obesity, to underachievement, and to depression, just for a start. In Dutch, in German, they say dik, dom, and depressief, which is a nice alliteration. And so what is a natural time zone? That's the time zone where the sun is at its highest at noon, at 12 o'clock, and you have the same amount of hours of sunlight before and after noon. And so the world has been divided into 24 time zones where where there's only 1 hour of difference from your actual solar time.
Half an hour.
Half an hour, yeah, from the meridian. So yeah, you see London goes Alicante. So we're actually almost on the meridian here. In Netherlands, we've been raising awareness about this fact and the fact that we actually have a double summertime in Western Europe for about 10 years now. And we started to actively lobby when the EU proposal was announced. We've written and we've spoken to politicians, we've done media interviews, we've attended government expert meetings. And from there, we set up a collaboration group of experts who are worried about the effects of living in an unnatural time zone and of the clock change. From chronobiologists like Till to experts on sleep, on health, on education, labor, economy, and safety. First, this was a national group, and then we started the Benelux Alliance for Healthy Time Use, a group of experts. We've also written a position paper to explain the urgency of the issue, the background, the scientific facts, and also the simple solution. This is available in 4 languages on our site. We'll show you later. And last year in 2020, we set up an international, worldwide collaboration. It's the International Alliance for Natural Time, which brings together advocates and activists from America to Australia, passing through Kazakhstan and the Russian region of Saratov, in order to coordinate plans and a strategy. And the key challenges we've all encountered in talking to each other, what we've discovered, is the general ignorance on the subject. There's misinformation, there's myths that people have been internalizing since the 1970s, even before, since World War II. And therefore, most policymakers, up to the highest levels, they don't truly understand the issue, and they fail to see the true costs associated with the clock changes and with living in unnatural time zones. So the main problem is this general ignorance, and also the fact that it's a complex issue, which the science is not easily explained. So scientists need activists to connect this knowledge to policy, and also activists need the right kind of people and the means to communicate this science and the urgency of the situation to both policymakers and general public. And that was, and also to say that politicians tend to focus on short-term, on crisis, and the underlying time use issues with this huge social impact. It's just not seen, or if it's seen, it's consciously or unconsciously downplayed, when in fact, the politicians and their employees are also victims of the chronic, the daily social jet lag that Till will explain, which is exacerbated by their heavy workloads and often extreme meeting times, which are proven to lead to bad decision-making. So, in conclusion, living in the wrong time zone and under DST seems to be a burden that you don't know you have until you're relieved of it, as we have seen in COVID. A lot of people have discovered this, that sleeping an hour extra gives them a lot more energy and a lot more life. And in continuing to keep this wrong time zone, we're willingly putting our countries at a disadvantage in Western Europe, and also with the DST change. So these 2 issues are an important and often overlooked factor in productivity and also in the obesity crisis and in the mental and physical health crisis. No.
Thank you, Ticia. And is that it? Yes, so then please.
I think I have a very similar slide, and the teacher, yes, this one. I'm very, very happy that the whole discussion has moved away from the transitions into DST and out of DST, because DST has to be seen in context, and the least danger we have is the transition itself. Everybody concentrates on the transition. Yes, you get a bit more heart attacks and more wildlife is being run over because they think there's nobody on the roads yet, and until they notice. But that's not the main problem. The main problem is that the human biological clock, which is so much of a true function in our body, so much that it got a Nobel Prize a couple of years ago. So it's not just something that is esoteric and is what I once was told by a colleague in the 90s. He said, the research you're doing, Dr. Roenneberg, is really very interesting, but amongst the two of us, this biological clock is rather something for sensitive people, isn't it? No, it's a real phenomenon, and the phenomenon is that you actually have a clock that adjusts to night and darkness, meaning that if you go throughout Europe, you will see that biology is persuasive. If you go to Galicia and try to get a table for an evening meal before 10 o'clock, you probably, especially in the summer, you have difficulties because they don't eat early. Everybody says it's cultural, but it's not, because the Galicians have to live according to Prague time, and that is in DST 2.5 hours away from sun time, which means when the clock says 10 in the evening, it's actually only 8:30 by sun time, and every normal person eats at 8:30 or even a bit earlier. Okay, a bit earlier. But it's not cultural, it is biology. And therefore, we have to come back to different time zones. And I'm showing you here, this is the state we are in Europe with the green time zone being the largest. And it's wrong, because only the half hour to the west and to the east of Prague should be in that time zone, and nobody else. So already the Benelux countries, France, and certainly Spain should be in a different time zone. And I don't buy the argument of changing clocks. I am planning Zoom meetings with the whole world, and I'm putting in my time. And the computer puts in all the other times that are necessary. The panhandle of Florida is, because it's so far west, in a different time zone than the rest of Florida. No economy, communication is disrupted. Everybody knows that people in Chicago are in a different time zone than people in Boston. It is easy, especially with modern computers. Europe does not have to have the same time zone. And finally, I would say there are two exit polls that have been quite bad in their quality, and that was Brexit, and that was DST, the European DST poll. It was awful. There was no information. What do you want? It was sort of like the Roman question: do you want games and fun? It's terrible. The other thing I want to say is, meanwhile, I want Europe to move into permanent DST, although it's absolutely counter biology, because this is such an emotional topic that we have to do what happened already at least 5 times in our history, that we install permanent DST, and then a couple of years later, everybody says, we can't live this. And then they know, and then they go back. So I don't want this discussion anymore. If there are people who want permanent DST, let's have it, because they will change it again, as everybody has in history so far. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much for a very good array of arguments, and some of the obstacles are already appearing in your intervention. So we were mentioning not preparedness from the technical point of view, but preparedness from the point of view of the debate, right? So debate not being ready, the questions not being properly asked. Now one doesn't get a pure second round at it. That's one, because that's already been done. The consultation is there. And so we're, in some ways, we have to make do with what we've had in the past. You were also mentioning, I think, the quality of the information that people have about this, the myths, the ignorance, the misinformation, even around this. And maybe we could also stop a little bit more with this, that is, to what extent is there some work to be done also on the narratives that are more persuasive? So, for example, it is persuasive to put people on the wrong time zone and discover after 3 years, but there's also, it's a bit costly, let's put it this way. So is there some work on narratives we need to do the second time round in terms of, if people are ignorant, or if people are misled, or if people tend to think that culture is the reason. How do we persuade them? Because one thing I always discuss with people who believe a lot in the power of powerfully stated facts to convince people is that evidence tells us that this is not the way to convince people, right? So if you believe in evidence, you know that evidence doesn't convince people. We know that, therefore, how else do we do this? And so my question here, and frankly, if you have also, I think everyone in the audience may have as good ideas as any of us could, so I'll also invite you all to come in, but my question here is, what else do we need to include in this narrative? So there's the science side, health side to things. But what else can we include, for instance, to overcome this narrative that this is about cultures? Or, and I believe, but maybe correct me if I'm wrong, that was also part of the argument, the feeling that some parts of Europe would be losing so that others would benefit, right? That we would be adapting to the way they eat in the Netherlands, or that we would be changing and having a worse time so that the Germans had a better time, or something like this. So how do we, but that's, you know, that's not, I think, unnatural in the normal European discussions on anything. So how do we counter these things beyond the sort of biological argument? So for example, Maria, you were saying the argument was not well prepared yet. So what does preparing a better discussion mean? Who do we need to take to the table, or what arguments do we need to perhaps try this second time round, so that this, I mean, I think there is a mixture of open hostility with a lot of just, this is not, you are saying this is not the issue that they will lose or win elections over. So between the uncertain benefit and the certain little bit of disruption and certain, and the suspicion it may be unpopular, I'd rather not do it, right? Please.
But that's why it's so important, yes, to discover the facts that it is, in fact, hurting our economies. It is bad on a lot of different, in a lot of different areas, and that's why it needs to be an interdisciplinary effort. We need a government task force, European task force, interdisciplinary, to look at this problem from all sides. It's not just health, it is also education, it is transport, it is work. There's all these aspects. It has to do with lack of sleep. In Western Europe, we get less sleep. We have more social jet lag the more west you go. And that influences everything, every aspect of our lives, and especially our productivity and our safety in our country. It's safety on the road, it's safety at work. And yeah, what is it? Education. It's actually been proven that the children do worse, especially the later chronotypes, which, you know, you have morning people, you have evening people. The later chronotypes, they do worse at school because they get less sleep. They have to get up earlier. And it's been proven that if they can sleep an hour later, they do much better in school. And so what are we doing to our children? We are doing this willingly, and it is a very simple solution. All we need to do is stop the clock change, which is no problem. That's the first thing. It's even, I've worked in IT, it is no problem. It actually costs more money to implement a DST change in new IT than to take it out. And the second point is, as Western Europe, we should go back to our Western European time and have the same amount of time zones that we currently have in Europe, but they're arranged as they should be. And the beauty is, if you show the picture again, you can see that the line of the end of the Western European time zone goes exactly along Germany, France. It's a perfect division, there's no problem. And the big myth that this would impact our internal economy and our transport, and it does not in big countries, as he said, in the United States and Russia, lots of different countries, big countries, wide countries, do not have problems with the different time zones. In fact, wide countries who have less time zones, such as Kazakhstan and, for example, China, they have problems with sleep and with health issues because of having only one time zone, and people have to work at different shifts because they can't get up so early. So, yeah, it's a very simple solution. It would not cost anything. really cost efficient, and all it would take is getting people to make that switch, that it is actually not a complex problem, and it can be easily done. It would not take there would not need to be a law made, nothing. So, yeah, we're trying to get that across. And,
Thank you. Maria, do you want to react?
Yeah, just a clarification when I'm talking about systems in time. No, I was referring that at the moment the proposal came out from the Commission, we didn't have enough time to prepare everything. I'm not saying it's impossible. I've also been working in the IT for a while, and I remember parameter changes that needed to be tested and confirmed and reconfirmed. It doesn't take years, but it doesn't take 5 minutes either. So at this moment, it was not viable. I'm not saying it isn't viable and we shouldn't do it. On the contrary, I'm also very much in favor. Now, we've seen that the blockage at this point is on the member states level. The Commission is prepared, the Parliament is prepared, they have been advancing a lot, and it's on the Council that they do not want to put it again on the agenda. When we're saying Council, it's the member states, once again. So I think that we should be working in parallel in two sets. First of all, to include the people, the ordinary people, everyday people, the ones who responded to the survey or not, to the debate. There is a high risk that science doesn't convince them and they end up advocating for the unhealthy time zone because they want to go out and have drinks until late, or whatever reason. We've seen it with the survey as well, that some decisions and some opinions were not based on science, but they're based on the personal way of people who want to live their lives. But I'm very much convinced that it should be science-driven, the whole debate, but in an easy way, and people for them to understand it. Now, how to move forward? We need to be aware of the tools that we have available right now. I'm thinking about the platform of the Conference of the Future of Europe. Currently, the European Union, they have decided to open a debate with the citizens, to listen to the people, to their concerns, and eventually legislate on the issues that they consider they affect them. This is a window of opportunity we have until April or May, until the platform is closed and debates start again, to mobilize and to put it back on the agenda, hopefully in a coordinated way, because the more visibility it gets within the platform, the more chance it will be discussed later on. Another tool that I'm thinking, even though it might seem that we are moving backwards instead of forward, it's to start a European Citizens Initiative. Once again, this is a tool that gives the possibilities to the people in Europe in a much more collaborative way, because you have to have the agreement of at least 7 member states and a minimum signature from each country, to discuss again and to demand to unblock the discussions. In this case, normally speaking, when you have this kind of initiatives, the Commission and the Parliament have not discussed the issue yet. So it would be the other way around. They have already discussed it, and we should be focusing on pushing them. It would give I think that it would give a more, how do you say it? More people would get involved from the citizens, so it will bring this point of maturity that was missing from the previous conditions, for example. So I think if we move towards these directions, we still have a chance.
I would like to add another perspective to this whole thing, because you are now the guys who've brought this onto a political level, and you and the states have to make decisions. But I think one of the reasons why we have this huge time zone in Europe is not only because Franco wanted to go to bed with Hitler, but also because we have the feeling that democracy is about treating people equally. And that is wrong. Because if you look at shift work, for example, shift work hits different people very differently. And therefore, not only the night shift is bad for everyone, but for late types, the early shift is bad. there are laws that some companies have to provide safety gear, like boots, for example. What we're doing at the moment, at many levels, is we provide safety boots, but the safety boots are all the same size because we say everybody should be the same. And therefore, poor people with small feet and large feet have to fit into boots that don't fit them. We have to understand that being different is part of being a group. And Europe is allowed to be different, is allowed to have different decisions, different time zones, different customs and so forth, and we will not fall apart. I think we would fall apart if we all have to wear the same boots from Galicia to the eastern border of Poland. Then we would fall apart. But if we embrace differences as part of being a family, I think we would get much further. And the DST issue goes exactly in that direction, because DST is nothing else than the decision at the last weekend in March to go to work an hour earlier. That's all there is. And work time schedules basically shouldn't be a political issue. It should be an issue of very much smaller unities.
Right. Although, if one changes out of DST and does not address the issue of natural time, then you may fall into problems that have nothing to do with DST, but that are interpreted as a malfunction of this change, right? So there is a very direct connection here. Is in a way, the trying to detach one debate from the other then can create these territorial tensions, because it is a very strange thing for Galicians to be, go to work at 9 and still it's dark or something like this, for example, right? So, although, it's very simple, but if you don't address the two issues at the same time, then you may be creating.
But the pandemic has shown us that the individuality is giving health and satisfaction to people who work.
And also has proven us that transitions are not that difficult when you...
Exactly.
I mean, like with transition to, remote work overnight, millions of people, and the systems supported it. So maybe we can change 1 hour, and the systems will also sustain it. There was one point that you made, Maria, which was about people whose lives are across borders, right? So French people who would be working in Geneva and changing, having that kind of crossing the timeline constantly, or whatever. I'm saying this because it's an area famous for, or Basel, or this kind of very transnational areas. Luxembourg would also be a case where the people living in the German side would be having this issue. Is that so significant, or is it kind of the excuse to not move forward? Is there a reason not to think that this is, in the end, the sun is in the same place, so it doesn't make such a big difference?
It's not a question of excuses. It's a question of, before we take a decision, what are the elements that we need to consider?
Right.
So it's just to start a debate and see which are the pros and cons, and for the cons, to have a plan B, or to organize them in a way that they will not affecting so much. They're not no stoppers, eh? It's just to put them on the table as well for the consideration.
Yeah, you were going to say something.
Yeah, you were talking about doing maybe a citizens' initiative, and what I wanted to say, what Till said before about the consultation that was done before, that was. A lot of people did not know about that consultation, so it wasn't a general European consultation. The people who knew about it voted, and it happened to be a lot of German people. And also this, what was the other thing you said, the European...
The platform from the Conference of the Future of Europe.
The activists have already put this issue on there, but now we have to get people to vote for it. And most people don't know and don't care about these kinds of platforms. So and also we question whether putting it back on the EU agenda is a priority right now, because we still have this proposal. It's been ratified by the parliament, and now the countries have to decide, yes, we're going to do this, and if we do it, we're going to go to this time zone, or we're going to go to that time zone. It's actually a pretty simple decision. If you present it in a simple way, it's not that difficult. And because the ball is still with these member states, maybe if we help them, if we reach them, we can help them make the decision, and we can just fix this really fast. We could go abandon DST next March, and the March afterward, Western Europe could go to its own time zone. And it would only require a slight tweak of the clock in most IT systems. And a lot of people would be happy. Even with DST being gone, it actually creates 2 days in the year where there's only 23 hours and 25 hours. And that's a big problem in industry and in transport of gas and all sorts of things. There's a lot of problems caused by DST that we're used to, that because we've had it for so long, we don't think about, but every time a new system needs to be designed, they have to take that into account. And all those hidden costs, they're all hidden, and they're not, there's no lobby fighting for them. So yeah, if you look at it, there's been economic studies done, and if you look at it at the balance, it's also a very healthy economic decision to do. So I think that getting this information out there might be the way to go.
One psychological argument is, which is important for a country like Spain, is the idea that you're part of another part of Europe, right? That is not the center.
And what about Portugal?
Or
No.
Portugal.
They have driven out.
Yes. No. But I'm saying this in terms of the time zone. Portugal are already one hour different from Spain. So the psychology of the West European time zone, I believe, it's crucial that it's all the countries at the same time.
Yes. And also calling it
get rid of this
West European time, and not calling it GMT or London time or something, but calling it West European time, and getting rid of these misguided terms like summertime and daylight saving time and all these things which really, you know, they play with your mind and they make you think it's all more complex and different than it is. It's very simple. If you look at the map, it is just a very simple problem with a very simple solution that is not going to cost a lot. So.
The psychology is in the words, as Ticia says.
Right.
If you ask people, what do you want, summertime or wintertime? I mean, first of all, there is no wintertime. I would always, if I didn't know anything, I would say summertime, because it's just the nicest sort of time of year. So we have to get rid of all this linguistic propaganda. And what I would like to know, what concrete plans does the European politics have to tackle this very difficult situation? Do they go back to it's all the countries are responsible for it and not the European politics are responsible for it? Or are they going to take leadership together with country to really settle this? That may be happening behind closed doors, but I have the feeling, as a person who's outside of these politics, that the pandemic was great, because now we can sort of say, because of the pandemic, we didn't do anything concerning DST. It was a huge topic before the pandemic. Now it's nowhere. What is the concrete goal of the European Union to do something concrete about this very important question?
I think they have already done it. They have done this proposal. They've said, okay, this is what we want to do. Now the countries have to decide what time zone they want to be in.
That's not.
But that's where they're at now. And for the rest, nobody thinks this is important. Nobody thinks this actually has any impact, because they don't know the facts. And I think that's where we have to start.
I think it's important to understand the dynamics of the European Union. Talking about the European Union, it doesn't really give us hints on who's taking the decisions. This is why I was mentioning it before, that the decision on derogating the time change is on a European level, which means that the Council, meaning the Member States' governments, the Commission and the Parliament have to get together, the three of them, to decide on the details on how to stop changing the time. But there is a principle of subsidiarity in the European Union, which means that the rest of the decisions on which time to take, they are taken on a member state level. And this is why the fact that it is blocked now on the council level, meaning the member states. It's not the European Union in general that doesn't want to take action. It's the actual member states that they do not want to put it on the agenda.
And the funny thing is, are in Brussels and in Strasbourg, and they can discuss it at the European level.
But they don't want to discuss it. That's the thing. And the funny thing is that Germany, who was the biggest country to have participated during I don't know if you know, the rotation of the presidency of the Council changes every 6 months. During the German presidency, it was completely out of the question.
Yeah.
They didn't mention. Of course, it coincided with COVID, so everything else was much more prioritized. No, thinking about the presidency of the European Council now, the next one is France, one of the countries that were actually participating a lot. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm sure that they're starting in the 1st of January. They must have their agenda already defined, although it's not published. But if there are people on the network with contacts to the French government, they would start preparing and paving the way to bring the discussion again to the Council. Next presidencies, Czech Republic, Sweden, and Spain at the end of 2023. These are all countries that they also, not on a very high level, but they were in favor and they participated also in the survey of the Commission. So this will not happen on a short term. We need to think middle and long term again. Because if the conversation has stopped and the moment that we're living and nobody's priorities...
But maybe there are other ways. Maybe a city or a few big cities can take the lead, get together and figure out a way to put this on the agenda, to show how it can be done differently. The funny thing about DST is that it's not regulated European-wide that we should have DST. Every country can decide whether to use DST or not. All that is regulated on the European level is when you start the DST and when you end it in the year. So if you choose to use DST, which a lot of European countries do not at this moment in Eastern Europe, then you have to use those dates. And that's all it is. And this new proposal, all it does is throw away this agreement that you have to start at the same date and end at the same date. And because that is scary, they said, well, if we agree to this proposal, then you also agree to never use DST again. And also, what people should know is that each country has the right to choose their own time zone if they want to. So if we want to, all the Western European countries could get together tomorrow and say, we want Western European time, and they could just arrange it themselves. There would be 1 or 2 little laws in each country that would need to be changed that state the time zone. But for the rest, it would be very easy to implement. And we could still do that, even if the DST stays in place. But we could do that, and we could also say we don't do DST anymore outside of Europe. So there's more ways to roam than just going through different European routes. And that was our proposal, that maybe we could find some sort of, a few cities who would like to become front runners in this and join forces together and get this moving in Western Europe.
That's interesting, and there's so many threads here now there is, and I'm just trying to bring them together a little bit. But before I do that, is there anyone in the audience who would like to intervene, contradict? I mean, we're having a good time here, but you know, do any questions, any comments on what we've said?
So far, it's very interesting and very diverse.
Good. So just to bring some of the threads together, and perhaps also...
I think there's somebody who has a question.
Sorry, we're a bit blinded by the lights here. That's fine? ¿Estás, Marta? No? Okay, that's fine. Thanks.
I thought you wanted to ask a question, but you were only holding on.
Thank you. No, so I was going to just kind of bring some of the threads together. So we're talking about where the debate needs to happen. And there's several locus which have happened. So you were, for example, Maria, thinking about ways to reactivate the pan-European debate and bring people back into the picture, including European Citizens Initiative and the Future for Europe, but also more generally, I think, initiatives that would bring this people's voice. But also there's other suggestions, which is for the member states, the countries really themselves, to have this reflection, have national debates, and see are we where we should be in terms of time zone, and does daylight saving still make sense for us? There's also another area which is reclaiming parts of the narrative. So, for example, the idea that actually, yes, we're trying to bring Europe together, but that doesn't mean we all have to have the same time. And actually, for all to have the same time is actually more unfair. No. And it imposes costs on people that we don't see, but they're there. So how do we sort of rebuild the narrative, but also the language, right? And you are saying some of the expressions are, daylight saving, who doesn't want to save, who doesn't want to live in summer all year.
The days are longer.
Right, exactly. Days are longer, exactly. All these things. You sleep one night, 1 hour more. This.
The Sunshine Protection Act.
The Sunshine Protection Act.
Yeah.
Sunshine Protection Act.
Yeah.
Very nice.
It's actually nice.
Good.
And that's why our activist there in the States calls it now the Sleep Protection Act.
Right. Excellent. You see, so that's exactly the kind of where the use of the right expressions can help. Then, of course, we're talking about restating the evidence of the benefits, and also the evidence of costs, right? So restating them in ways that are more understandable, more obvious, more actionable politically. We've talked about some of the obstacles, the obstacle of preparedness, not so much of being ready to do it as of being ready to discuss it in ways, for example, where the questions lead to answers that are a bit more, perhaps, well elaborated. The issue of the obstacle of the transition, which doesn't seem to be a huge one, but one does need to remove it from the table before you can ignore it, and the obstacle of indifference and low priority, of saying this is not very important, right? Then you mentioned issues which are interesting that could be connected. Of course, the issue of natural time, which is a sort of natural connection, but also the issue of what we've learned in the pandemic about time use, about mental health, about all these things. Can we use the lessons from the pandemic and say, well, if we've learned all these things about use of time, if we've learned all these things about welfare, why then do we ignore them when we talk about the time we use? And then difficult questions, timing. When is it the good time to bring this back to the national or to the international level? And agency, who could be brought to the table who hasn't been there? Ticia was saying maybe cities. That may be one option. Is there other actors, I don't know, professional groups? Is there other, I don't know, business interest or others that can be perhaps have a stronger voice in this? And there's always dangers in bringing one group, then it can generate others to say, if they say this, maybe there is something hidden behind. So I'm saying this with caution. I don't know if I've made a good summary of all the things that are on the table. I think there isn't a ready-made solution for this, but I believe with the perspectives that we had here today, Marta and the rest of the organizers, I hope you end up with a long to-do list of threats to follow rather than a solution, but follow. Yes, please.
I would like to add something which is again a story, a picture, a metaphor, and that is the whole discussion we have is about light and sleep and working at the optimal times in a way. It reminds me of smoking, because the hedonic part of smoking is every smoker likes smoking. But it's not that good for health. And it took huge PR budgets to make the population aware that this is actually not that good. We need the same thing for sleep and for internal time. We need huge budgets by the European market to fill the cinemas with really good and cool ads for why it is important to sleep well and to not smoke in the sense of the old ads, anti-smoking ads. Because I think once we have established in the minds that this is an important issue, there will be no debate about daylight savings time. It's something we have to get rolling, and we need money for that. Because it's almost as chronically health challenging as the smoking has been.
Good. We have two questions from the online audience, from the chat. So, and one is exactly what you are just saying now, which is why does the EU not invest in education about the negative consequences of living in the wrong time zone? And the other one is a bit unrelated to you, Maria, so I'm going to leave this one first. I mean, is it because it's no one's clear dossier? Is it like it's not a clear health-only issue, business-only? Is it the interdisciplinary?
It's multidisciplinary,
right?
And there's a lot of misgivings, a lot of myths, a lot of misunderstanding. So yeah, if they don't know, then they can't decide to.
But the evidence is there. They're wonderful. The United States is a much better petri dish for these epidemiological experiments, because the culture is not as different as between Poland and Portugal. Mm-hmm. So if you go across the United States, if you look at the statistics within a time zone, the healthiest people and the wealthiest people live at the eastern border of every time zone because they are not so far away from their sun time. And within the time zone, well, it's sort of like this, within the time zone, the health goes down, 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 including the economic health. So you earn less. And then you come to the time zone border, and it jumps up again, and then it goes down again. The evidence is there. And what we're doing is we're starting here as good health, and we're going down,
Western
down,
Europe
down.
is way there.
And now we're putting all these people that have been up here by DST, we're putting there already, and then they're going down from there. The evidence is out there, and what we need is good education of the people by having ads in cinemas, as the smoking ads, anti-smoking ads. And banning, like anti-smoking, banning people who misguide people by saying, but we come home early, we have longer evenings or something like that.
Right.
Summertime, wintertime, they should be banned like smoking ads.
Yes, maybe we don't need gruesome pictures on.
Well, they don't help. If you smoke, you can look at your lung and your impotence. It doesn't help.
Very good. There's another direct question for you, Maria, about the small number of cross-border workers and why choose this group and take other citizens hostages with an incorrect hour?
Good question.
It's not, I'm saying once again, these are some of the elements that we need to consider in order to advance with the debate. It's not a question of taking hostage one part of the population or another. It's about saying that for some people, having what is currently harmonized, a harmonized situation, current situation, not well prepared, might create other issues for them. But again, it's not about bringing people confronting people or segments of the population with one another.
Thank you. Well, if there's no other questions, and we're almost at time, I would like to really thank the panelists. That was stimulating. We didn't just agree and say yes to each other, which is a good thing. And I think there's, as I was saying, there's a number of threats, there's a number of issues which just go beyond received wisdom of this is the right thing to do, and therefore one day we will prevail. And instead, it's actually looking for different avenues, some of which may be more or less fruitful. And with any luck, we can see that these end up being not just talk, but action. And actually, as we've heard very eloquently, action which will improve lives very substantially. So well worth doing it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.